It is December 1944. The Allies in Europe are advancing from all directions, but the Axis powers are still offering significant resistance. From the east, the Red Army has reached Budapest, where fierce fighting is taking place. On the Western theater of operations, the Germans launched the Ardennes offensive. Belgrade and Tirana were liberated, and in Italy, the Allies entered Ravenna. Further progress stopped due to bad weather conditions and heavy rains. With the Allied landings in Italy in 1943, the possibility of deploying a strategic air force in the Mediterranean theater emerged. While the 8th Air Force was launching attacks on German industry and air installations from England, establishing bases in Italy offered several advantages. A larger portion of Germany could be reached, the strain on German fighter interceptor forces would be divided, and the more favorable weather conditions in southern Italy would enhance strategic bombing operations. To capitalize on these opportunities, the 15th Air Force was formed under the command of General Jimmy Doolittle, later led by General Nathan Twining. The 15th Air Force comprised bomber, fighter escort, and reconnaissance groups. The fighter groups were equipped with P-38 Lightning and P-51 Mustang fighters, while the reconnaissance groups utilized P-38 Lightnings modified for reconnaissance missions. The bomber group consists of 5 bomb wing equipped with B-24 Liberator heavy bombers. The bomb wing has 4 bomb groups and each group has 4 squadrons with approximately 50 aircraft. At the beginning of World War II, the U.S. Army Air Forces requested a heavy bomber with greater capabilities than the B-17 Flying Fortress. By the end of 1939, the first B-24 Liberator prototype had taken flight. This 4-engine behemoth could reach altitudes of 11,000 meters and fly up to 4,800 kilometers. Armed with 10 machine guns and capable of carrying 5,800 kilograms of bombs, the Liberator was manned by a crew of 10, including pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio operators, and gunners. Its exceptional range and ability to withstand heavy damage made it a favorite among air crews. In Europe, a significant number of Liberators were based in England, while others were stationed in Foggia, Italy. In support of ground forces in southern France and Italy, the 15th Air Force, equipped with B-24 Liberators, targeted strategic facilities in Germany, including weapons factories in Czechoslovakia and oil fields in Romania. Additionally, to disrupt German withdrawal routes from Greece, the 15th Air Force attacked key targets in the Balkans, such as ports, airports, and marshalling yards. The island of Vis was for a long time the only liberated island in the Adriatic and the center of military activities of the British and partisan forces. At the end of 1944, operations began from that island that would liberate the whole of Dalmatia by December. The island's operational importance will soon disappear, but its airfield will serve as a refuge and the last hope for many damaged aircraft and their crews. On the morning of December 20th, 1944, 2 Spitfires from No. 1435 Squadron of the Royal Air Force took off from Vis Airport. The previous night, signal flares had been spotted over the sea, and the Spitfires were tasked with searching for survivors. Originally formed as a night fighter squadron, No. 1435 Squadron had been re-rolled as a fighter-bomber unit and deployed to the Italian theater. A detachment of the squadron had been stationed on Vis since September 1944, conducting aerial reconnaissance, combat air patrols, and fighter-bomber missions in support of partisan forces in Albania and Yugoslavia. While the Spitfires failed to locate any survivors at sea, they did spot a large formation of Allied bombers returning to Italy. Soon, a lone heavy bomber appeared above the airport. Struggling to maintain altitude with only 2 functioning engines, preparing for a desperate emergency landing. On the morning of December 20th, 1944, 126 B-24 Liberators from the 304th Bomb Group took off from Foggia Airfield. A portion of the group, including the 455th Bomb Group and its 37 aircraft, was tasked with attacking the city of Brux and its oil facilities in Czechoslovakia. To increase their chances of survival, the bombers flew in tight formations, known as boxes, to provide mutual protection. Leading the 455th Bomb Group was the experienced Colonel William Snowden. Flying on the right wing of the formation in a B-24 named Dakota Queen was Lieutenant George McGovern. This was McGovern's 11th mission, and he had 24 more to go before returning to the United States to reunite with his family. His children and wife, the inspiration behind the name Dakota Queen, adorning every aircraft he's piloted. After completing his training in the United States, McGovern joined the 741st Bomber Squadron, based at San Giovanni Airfield. During his second mission, his B-24 was struck by a German anti-aircraft shell. Shrapnel narrowly missed McGovern and shattered the aircraft's windshield, but he managed to complete the mission. During his third mission, the B-24 he was piloting experienced a catastrophic wheel failure upon takeoff. Unable to halt the heavy bomber on the runway, he made the daring decision to continue the flight, fully aware of the perilous landing that lay ahead. Through exceptional skill and judgment, he executed a masterful emergency landing, touching down on the left and nose wheels and maintaining control until the aircraft came to a complete stop. McGovern later recounted this as the best landing he ever made in his life. His extraordinary ability to perform under pressure and make sound decisions in critical situations soon led to his nomination for the Distinguished Flying Cross. After detaching a group of aircraft to target Austrian objectives, the 455th and part of the 456th bomb groups proceeded toward Brux, but strong headwinds forced them to divert to the secondary target of Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Pilsen was a heavily defended city, home to the Škoda Works, a major manufacturer of armaments for the Axis powers. At the outset of the war, Škoda manufactured the Panzer 38, a light tank extensively employed in the invasion of the Soviet Union. Towards the war's end, the Hetzer tank destroyer emerged as a highly effective, light-armored weapon within the Axis arsenal. The flight to Pilsen was unusually calm, with no significant anti-aircraft fire or enemy fighter opposition. However, the Dakota Queen encountered a serious mechanical issue when one of its engines failed an hour before reaching the target. Despite the risk, McGovern chose to continue the mission rather than abandoning it. As the formation approached Pilsen, intense anti-aircraft fire began to target the bombers. Just as the Dakota Queen was preparing to bomb the target, a second engine caught fire. McGovern immediately ordered his crew to drop their bombs and break formation. The thick cloud cover over the city forced the other bombers to bomb blindly, with the aid of a guidance plane equipped with H-2X radar. After dropping their bombs, the formation began the long flight back to Italy. McGovern was now flying solo, out of formation, and slowly losing altitude with only 2 functioning engines. A more pressing concern was the 5 minutes it would take for the flames to reach the fuel tank behind the engine. To mitigate this, he initiated a series of dives using the air current to suppress the fire. However, these maneuvers also caused a loss of altitude, further jeopardizing their chances of returning. McGovern informed the crew over the intercom that anyone wishing to bail out was free to do so. He and Lieutenant Rounds would continue the flight. Given the lack of parachute training and the hostile conditions of the Adriatic Sea, the entire crew chose to remain on the plane. They began jettisoning unnecessary equipment to lighten the load. Ammunition, machine guns, bulletproof vests, oxygen tanks, navigation tables, and anything else that could reduce the plane's weight. McGovern realized that reaching Italy was impossible, so he decided to attempt an emergency landing at the small airport on the island of Vis. The approach path required a sharp dive over a hill, followed by a level flight toward the runway. This maneuver reignited the fire in engine number 3. The Liberator typically required a 4.5-kilometer runway, while Vis's airport was only 2 kilometers long. The plane touched down at an uncontrolled speed, and McGovern and Rounds frantically pulled back on the controls to prevent it from overshooting the runway. Through the side windows, they could see the wreckage of previous B-17 and B-24 bombers that had failed to land safely. With screeching tires, the plane finally came to a halt next to a vineyard at the end of the runway. McGovern embraced co-pilot Lieutenant Rounds in relief, while the rest of the crew celebrated around the aircraft. Their joy was short-lived, however, as another damaged Liberator from the 15th Air Force appeared on the horizon. Unfortunately, the aircraft lost altitude and crashed into Hum Hill. Spitfires from the 1435 Squadron located the wreckage, and a large rescue operation ensued. 6 crew members were found seriously injured, while 5 others perished in the crash. McGovern and his crew were evacuated the following day via C-47 and promptly joined the 455th Bomber Group. Lieutenant McGovern flew his final 35 missions over the heavily defended city of Linz, Austria. The Dakota Queen was repeatedly hit, sustaining over 110 holes in its fuselage and wings and experiencing hydraulic system failures. The side gunner was injured, the flight engineer incapacitated by post-traumatic stress, and McGovern was forced to improvise a landing technique. With the hydraulics out, the crew manually lowered the landing gear. To slow the plane on the runway, McGovern immediately applied the brakes, and the crew deployed 2 parachutes attached to machine gun mounts. The aircraft finally came to a safe stop at the end of the runway, marking the end of McGovern's combat flying career. For his extraordinary courage and skill, particularly during the emergency landing at Vis Airport, McGovern was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. After completing his tour of duty, he returned to the United States and embarked on a distinguished career in politics, serving as a congressman, senator, and presidential candidate. He was a vocal opponent of the Vietnam War and a dedicated advocate for human rights and global hunger relief. With a production run of approximately 18,000 aircraft, the B-24 Liberator remains the most produced American military aircraft in history. However, the high casualty rate among B-24 crews, estimated at 50%, underscores the perilous nature of aerial warfare during World War II. The 15th Air Force remained in Italy until the end of the war. Despite suffering heavy losses, the 455th Bomb Group achieved a remarkable air combat ratio of 3.84, and with 253 missions contributing significantly to the Allied victory in Europe.
That would have been at the end of May. The end of May. We did one thing before we left Italy. General Twining knew that we had supplies to last for months. You know, powdered milk, powdered eggs, clothing, mattresses, all kinds of canned goods. And he said, I don't want to take any of this back to the States. I need some guys to volunteer to fly it up to Europe, up to Northern Europe, where people are hungry. So I did that for 3 or 4 days. We'd load those bombers full of food, fly up to Trieste and other places that were just at the bottom of the war zone, and it'd be picked up in army trucks and taken out to people. In some cases, we were hauling food up to people we'd been bombing the week before. So that was the beginning of the Marshall Plan.
You were on the front end of the Marshall Plan. How interesting.
I hated to be delayed 4 or 5 days getting back to Eleanor and my new child, but I thought, how can I not do this? You know, we've seen hunger all during this war, and obviously it was even worse in parts of Northern Europe, so I was always kind of glad that I stayed and did that, and maybe relieved the hunger. We took up mattresses and bedding and army blankets, everything we could find that they could use. I don't think we took anything back to the States.
No, I'm aware that you had what was amounted to a crash landing when you returned from the mission over Linz.
Yes.
Did you have any other close calls?
Yes, we had several close calls. We had to make a forced landing on the Isle of Viz. That was a 2,200-foot runway. You need 5,000 feet for a B-24, but it was either that or ditch in the Adriatic Sea with 20-foot waves, a bad storm on. So I took my chances on that. Fortunately, I hit right at the end of the runway, and Bill Rounds and I got on the brakes all the way down to the end. Nobody was hurt. We were down to 2 engines, and one of those went out so fast you couldn't keep the propeller from windmilling, so that was a drag. We had to get on the ground, and that's what I got the Distinguished Flying Cross for.
Well, speaking of awards and decorations, aware now that you have the DFC. When you came home, what else were you authorized to wear?
I had the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. I had the Legion of Honor Merit for our group. That's about it. The Distinguished Flying Cross was what every pilot had coveted getting, no matter what else you had. If you were a pilot, you coveted the DFC.
So when you landed at Viz, had you taken flak damage? Is that what was?
Oh yeah, we were hit very hard that day. Knocked out 2 engines and tore up the plane quite a bit, but it didn't destroy the brakes. So we were able to ride those brakes. So the tires were in ribbons by the time we got to the end of the runway. We stopped about 15 feet from the far end of the runway. As you came down, there was a hill at the end of the runway. You could see the carcasses of planes that had come in there and didn't make it. Years later, Marshal Tito was entertained at the White House by President Carter. And he said, well, I met at least one famous American quite a few years ago. He paid us a visit out on the Isle of Viz, which was my command headquarters in the underground operations against Hitler. I didn't know he was there, but he did. He remembered it.
It's not every day that you see a B-24 land on 2,200 feet of runway.
No.
So did you get out of that island on that airplane, or did you get out some
No, we left the airplane. No way you could take it off. It was, first of all, it was so badly crippled. They didn't have anything like the mechanical ability to repair it. And so we just left it there. I have a certain Scotch blood along with the Irish, and I knew that plane cost $250,000. I thought, my God, I just feel terrible. $250,000 of the taxpayers' money laying here in a pile of junk, you know. B-2 bomber costs $2 billion today. We don't have 250,000. That's lunch money by today's standards. So I remember having that sensation, along with the enormous relief that we were all still alive. It's the only time during the war where the other 9 guys just leaped out of the plane and kissing the ground. It looked like a bunch of puppies out there just jumping around. I'll never forget that scene. The other scene I remember, they had a latrine. There these single holders, there must have been a dozen, I suppose used by Marshal Tito's forces. Anyway, I located that place, and I was sitting there, and after a minute I became aware that the people on each side of me were women. They didn't think anything of it, you know. There'd be 3 or 4 men and another woman. There'd probably, of the dozen people in there, probably 4 or 5 of them were women. Nobody thought anything of it. Wartime, this is a function people have to perform even in wartime, so why build separate places for men and women? That was never adopted in the American Army, but the Yugoslavs seemed to think it was fine.